Welcome back to the Copado Architect Corner. Today we're tackling a sometimes controversial topic, whether you have separate developer sandboxes or shared developer sandboxes. Welcome back to the Copado Architect Corner. Today we're going to be tackling the topic of should we have shared developer sandboxes or separate developer sandboxes. You could even include that with like DX sandboxes. It's funny, over the years, there can be things that can get people riled up. Like, do I code in .NET or Java? Am I a iPhone or Android? When I'm coding, do I put the squiggly right after the method or down below? These are some fun battles that I have seen over the years. Here in Salesforce, this is an interesting one. Best practice is to give your developers their own developer sandbox or have them spin up DX sandboxes. But then there's a flip side argument that with the overhead of that, where it's better to have them share a developer sandbox. And so there are actually arguments to both sides. And what we're going to do is we're going to discuss both those arguments in this video, so you as an architect can understand the reasonings for both sides and make the appropriate decisions for your project and your specific needs. So first, let's take a look at a system landscape and talk about some of the things in there that might lean you one way or the other in that decision. So first, let's talk about having integrations. If you've got integrations with external systems, that means you're going to need named credentials in a dev sandbox. And I'm referring to an environment where you need those integrations to be operable, either calling out or calling in, and you need them operable during development, which can be necessary if you're going to be building against data that you're calling out, data that's pushing in, or even good bidirectionally synced data. So if you have a developer sandbox that has these integrations and you have 10 developers, you need to say to yourself, can I support 10 dev sandboxes with 10 different integration endpoints? Now you might, let's say, isolate those integrations to only a couple of sandboxes and say the other developers don't need it. But an integration endpoint, especially with bidirectional, could definitely lean you towards more of a singular environment. Two, there are certain elements in here around digital experiences, configuration, and others that can lead you to wanting to share. So let's continue. And so the diagram is going to be here. This is the ultimate diagram. Am I doing 3 devs, which could be 10, or one big dev that maybe replaces the need for a dev int? Because if I have multiple devs, I'm going to need a dev int as a place to bring their code together and make sure their code coexists. Now, this is where an important decision can be made. Multiple devs going to a dev int, or a singular large dev, maybe using like a dev pro or even a partial. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss some of the situations and the reasonings for either approach. So separate developer sandboxes. This is the standard. You have isolated development. You're not interfering with each other's code. When you're sending forward, you're going to be keeping their changes, but you do need to remember that if I'm sending code forward from dev 1 into dev int, then I've got to do back deploys, bringing it into dev 2. So by having isolated environments, I do have a higher back deploy effort. And if there's a lot of merge conflicts, that can cause issues. So this is actually fewer merge conflicts going forward, but you do have significant number of back deploys. Now, another advantage of separate environments is customized testing. So one developer making code changes does not cause unanticipated side effects. The same thing with, you might even be able to override code, stick in hard-coded values. Developers would have full freedom to operate their environment to get the job done and only promote the appropriate code using, let's say, the pull requests. Debugging. Imagine trying to debug something and 10 other developers are debugging it something else themselves. You might have to worry about, developers, running the same processes at the same time, and even having the ability to potentially have different modified classes to facilitate development. So this is the advantage of separate dev environments. You have separation, but you are sending forward motion, which does require back deploys to keep these in sync. Let's move on and take a look at the next situation. Shared developer sandboxes they are inherently working on the same code. Now, you might choose this if you definitely needed to worry about you kept the developers separate, each an isolated component. The shared minimizes back promotions. Your integrations can be set up. Everyone's working this simple truth. Now, this is optimal for configuration heavy elements such as CPQ with CPQ configurations, velocity, and etc. So imagine trying to have a CPQ configuration in Dev 1 and have the identical CPQ configuration in 2, the identical CPQ configuration, and multiply this times 20 developers, all working on a CPQ configuration. They might find that impossible to do that because CPQ is data heavy. And that is another element for why you might want a shared environment. Heavy data that's hard to configure, test data, configuration data. Those are elements that would lean you towards a shared environment. So multiple integrations would lead you to share, the overhead of maintaining that. Multiple heavy dev configurations would lead you to shared, and the overhead of back deploys, especially using, heavy conflict-ridden elements such as complicated flows and velocity. So this is your big decision. If you're doing a lot of coding, you definitely want to go to the isolated environments. If you're doing configuration heavy, then you don't have to worry about the overhead and the cutoffs that can happen in Visual Studio. Now, here's a Visual Studio that's connected to an environment. And I'm going to show you got to be really careful if you're in a shared environment. So my capabilities for SFDX is, let me bring that up again. I could be deploying this source to org. What this will do is this will take my local copy on my computer and overwrite what's in the org. So if there were another developer working on this class, I would overwrite it. So that could cause an issue. I could retrieve source from org, and that means I'm trying to grab a fresh copy. And if a developer has been in there, they might overwrite mine. So this dance between retrieve source from org and deploy source to org is a complete pull from the server or a write to the server. And if multiple developers are working on this same class simultaneously, it can create, based on timing of pull and push, it can create issues. You'd have to really train your developers to do diffs against it. So really, it's a lot more sensitive if you were having multiple developers writing the same code at the same time. You will end up with overwrite after overwrite after overwrite. So that is because this is a set of files that actually exist on my computer. And if I had 10 developers, they would be the code in the org and the code in the 10 developer file systems, let alone if they're doing their push and pulls between through the source code control. So what we've got this reading and writing of files using Visual Studio. This leans you to separate sandboxes. So I've actually had architects I've been chatting with where some say absolutely every developer gets their own, keeps them from losing code. And then I've talked to others that say I have big dev teams, test data, integrations. I'll go insane having to set up 10, 20, 30, 40 environments, all identical, and handle that. And I've even had other architects tell me that there is so much collision on the velocity, that the merge conflicts, that if they all work in one environment and you separate them by functional element, then you eliminate all of that. So there are good arguments on both sides of the equation. You need to look at your environment. What are your metadata elements? How is your team organized? And make the local call. In fact, you might even have your coding developers with their own sandboxes and your config developers sharing a partial sandbox or a dev pro. So these are decisions you need to make for each particular project. So thank you for joining. And with great power comes great responsibility not to break the shared sandbox. I thought that'd be a funny one. I hope you've enjoyed this. Wait for more coming from the Copado Architect Corner and have a great day.